Yes, I want muscular Jews and a muscular Israel. I want Jews proud of the extraordinary nation-state that Jews created in 1948 out of the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. I want Jews who are armed and Jews who will defend themselves with arms if necessary. Muscular in every way, yes. I want more than just individual Jews armed. I want a Jewish nation-state possessing in its arsenal the most advanced modern weapons available. A state that can be counted on to defend Jews from their global enemies, and particularly their enemies in the Muslim world, who are legion, and who have sworn our destruction, and who are openly planning to finish the job that they started. I want a Jewish state armed to the teeth, because Islamic Nazis, who are the stormtroopers of a second Holocaust, are already mobilized, and because, as we discovered during the first Holocaust, there are not enough non-Jews in the world who are willing and prepared to defend us.
Yes.
I am glad that Israel exists. I am glad that there is a country that will preserve Jewish culture and be a model to the world of what Jews can do when they are given the chance. Today, Israel is per capita the world's leading scientific and technological innovator and contributor to human advancement. As a Jew, I'm also thrilled that in the creation of Israel, Jews have regained their birthright. After 2,000 years of exile, the oldest surviving indigenous people in the world has won the right to some of its stolen homeland. I look forward to the day when Judea and Samaria, the historic centers of Judaism, become part of the Jewish homeland. That homeland is now occupied by Palestinian Arabs who are at war with Israel, who have proclaimed their Jew hatred to the world, and who have forfeited any right to the territories by conducting 5 unprovoked armed aggressions against the Jewish state. The official policy of the Palestinian Authority is to make Jerusalem and the entire region of Palestine Judenrein. No other country in the world is expected to suffer such genocidal assaults without securing borders that are defensible, and Israel should not be expected to either. Nonetheless, there is a paradox. In this honor given to me, a Jew who has never been to Israel, and who has never considered himself a Zionist in the sense its founders intended. Herzl and his followers embraced the Zionist idea because they believed that the creation of a Jewish nation would provide a solution to the Jewish question. The fact that Jews had been a homeless people for nearly 2,000 years and were ghettoized and persecuted in the alien lands into which they were driven. Herzl's Zionist idea was grounded in the belief that the establishment of a Jewish state on Jewish land would finally normalize the Jewish people and end their persecution. The Zionist idea was that by including Jews among the nations, Jews would become ordinary and like other peoples, that their inclusion would finally solve this problem. That was the meaning of Zionism, as Herzl understood it. And indeed, it was understood that way until the Holocaust and the actual creation of the Jewish state. For Herzl's dream proved to be a fairy tale, as delusional in its way as the dreams of socialism, communism, and progressivism, whose believers hoped that these would provide solutions to the conflicts and sufferings that blight our human state. All these isms took hold in the 19th century and became forms of modern faith. The traditional religions they supplanted had trusted in a divinity for such a solution, or were forced into retreat before the advance of Darwinian theory and modern scientific developments. All the messianic visions of the modern age were driven by the desire for an earthly redemption that would resolve our human dilemmas and achieve what the heavenly redemption could no longer convincingly offer. Among these fantasies of a better world than the one we inherited, Zionism was the most conservative. practical. The quest for a socially just future are based on no human reality, but on the expectation of a human miracle, a transformation of who we are and what we have been into something wonderfully different. Zionism, by contrast, was based on the experience of actual peoples who had already taken their place among the nations. It was a quest for normality, not for a world transformation, but for an integration into the existing world of others. But even this modest hope of the Jews has proved an impossible dream. It is true that half of Herzl's goal has been realized, and in an astounding way. Yet its very realization has proved the hope that it inspired it to be a folly. By all standards of civilization and modernity, Israel should be admired and emulated by the rest of the world. Instead, the Jewish state is hated and is a pariah among the nations, just as Jews themselves are pariahs of most of the world outside America today. Far from creating a refuge, Israel has become the focal point of all the genocidal intentions against the Jews, which have never been more overt or more global. Today, Israel is the site of a Holocaust for which the Islamic world openly yearns, and which the rest of the world, with the possible exceptions of America and Canada, will not lift a finger to prevent. This sobering reality has changed the meaning of Zionism and has made it a more comfortable fit for me. Call it the Zionism of survival. In the household I grew up in, I was not brought up to be a Zionist because my parents were Marxist progressives who looked to a socialist future to provide an earthly salvation and an end to the persecution of the Jews. My parents and their comrades believed that mankind's conflicts would be resolved by a universal class whose revolution would abolish all nations and unite all peoples, and thus remove the distinctions that made them Jews. My realization that this was not going to happen occurred through my relationship with a Polish Marxist who was my mentor named Isaac Deutscher. Deutscher had written a book called The Non-Jewish Jew, by which he meant Marxists like us, Jews who were of Judaism but not in it. By the time I came under his influence in the 1960s, he had become a defender of Israel and had been one since the Second World War. Deutscher viewed Israel as a raft state, a refuge that Jews could cling to after they had been shipwrecked in the storms that periodically engulfed them. The particular storm he was referring to was Hitler's final solution. During the interwar years, a debate raged in Europe's left-wing circles, which carried momentous consequences for those who participated in it. The debate was about how Jews should respond to the looming fascist threat. The Zionists were urging Jews to flee the continent and take refuge in the Palestine Mandate. Marxists like Deutscher argued that Jews should stay in Europe and fight for the socialist revolution. But as Deutscher ruefully acknowledged later, the Jews who listened to the Zionists were still alive, while those who listened to Marxists like him were dead. Under Deutscher's influence, I became a quasi-Zionist, a believer in the raft state. Israel should exist and be defended until the socialist transformation abolished nation states and solved the problem of the Jews once and for all. Don't think for a moment that this is some quaint Marxist delusion now consigned to history's dustbin. The idea of a world without borders is alive and well in the international left and among liberals and progressives in America. It is the idea that animates the Democratic Party's attacks on American sovereignty, and it is a vision whose intellectual leaders are Jews. One of its key articles is called Patriotism and Cosmopolitanism, for the latter and against the former. It was written by Harvard philosopher Martha Nussbaum. According to Nussbaum, the cosmopolitan ideal which progressive people should aspire to is the person whose primary allegiance is to the community of human beings in the entire world. This attitude that we are not Jews or Americans, but citizens of the world, explains why people on the left are so uncomfortable with or simply hostile to issues of national security and patriotism. It explains why progressive Jews can be indifferent to the survival of the Jewish state. Even as I absorbed Deutscher's lesson about the Raft state, my belief in the progressive fantasy was collapsing. I had begun to doubt the very possibility of a redeemed future, a future fundamentally different from those with which we were historically familiar. As these doubts grew, they were changing my view of the unredeemed present. By the middle of the next decade, I no longer believed in a new world order. And this had immediate and profound consequences for my attitude towards Israel and my identity as a Jew and as an American as well. There was not going to be a future in which there were no longer nations or peoples in conflict. There was not going to be a future in which Jews would cease to be the objects of envy and resentment and virulent hatred. There was not going to be a future in which a refuge, a raft state, was no longer useful. Then came 9/11 and the Islamic attack on the World Trade Center. It was an event that made millions of people aware of the Islamist movement in the Muslim world and the fact that they were conducting a holy war against infidels in general and Jews in particular. The incubator and leading force of this holy war is the Muslim Brotherhood, an organization founded by an admirer of Hitler and a godfather of the call to push the Jews of Palestine into the sea. Today, the spiritual leader of the Brotherhood is the Egyptian Imam Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who has publicly prayed that the Muslim believers will finish the job that Hitler started. Millions of Jews are in denial when it comes to the determination of Islamists to kill them. In part, this denial is psychological and familiar, as when people face a prospect that is too terrible to contemplate. There are 1.5 billion Muslims in the world today who worship a prophet who has told them that the day of redemption will only come when Muslims fight the Jews and kill them, when the Jews hide behind the rocks and the trees, and the rocks and the trees cry out, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." For 1.5 billion Muslims, that is the word of God. Denial is one convenient way of dealing with this fact. This particular death warrant for the Jews can be found on the official website of the University of Southern California, where it was placed by the Muslim Students Union, which is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood. When I asked the leader at the Wiesenthal Center to demand that this genocidal incitement be removed, his initial response was, "But it's a religious statement." Well, yeah, but it is also a summons to kill the Jews. Such is the force of denial. One of the chief instruments of the Muslim Brotherhood is the Muslim Students Association, which sponsors Israeli apartheid weeks at universities across America and throughout the Western world, calling for Israel's destruction. Muslim Students Association members chant, "Palestine will be free from the river to the sea," that is, from the eastern boundary of Israel to the western one. It is a call for the liquidation of the Jewish state because it is Jewish. Yet all across America, campus rabbis hold ecumenical dialogues with the Muslim Students Association and defend it against its critics. I have traveled to many universities to oppose these Jew haters, and everywhere I go I am protested against and defamed by the Muslim Students Association and by their Jewish enablers. I have met with numerous campus rabbis and asked them to set conditions for their ecumenical outreach. First, that their Muslim counterparts desist from sponsoring Israeli apartheid weeks and denounce those who conduct them. And second, that they only hold dialogues with people who publicly support the right of a Jewish state to exist in the Middle East. I have been attacked by Hillel rabbis at Yale, the University of North Carolina, the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the University of Florida, and by Hillel student leaders at the University of Pennsylvania and other schools. For voicing these concerns, I've been called a bigot, a racist, and an Islamophobe, which is a smear invented by the Muslim Brotherhood to silence its critics.